Good. Hello, my name is Allison Kennington, and I am here with Progress Virginia in the last of our Christmas in July Facebook Live events. And I'm here with V, and they're with Virginia Equality. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Oh, V, you're on mute.
Can't tell you how many times I do that. Good morning. Hi, my name is V. Lamnick, and I use they and them pronouns, and I am the executive director at Equality Virginia.
Okay, great. And could you mind telling us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. So we've been around since 1989, actually. We are an advocacy group based here in Richmond, but we do statewide work. So we do training and education, grassroots organizing all across the Commonwealth. But we're really well known for our advocacy work here at the General Assembly, supporting bills that protect LGBTQ Virginians and then fighting against anti-LGBT bills or bills that would be harmful to the community.
Okay, that's great. My first question is, so which new Virginia law gives you the most Christmas spirit?
So I am feeling a lot of Christmas spirit actually right now. Lots of warm and fuzzy feelings. So it's going to be hard to distill it down into one because this was a landmark year for LGBTQ equality here in Virginia. We passed many bills that protect LGBTQ Virginians that are now signed into law and now, as of July 1st, are now in effect. And so Virginia became the first state in the South to protect LGBTQ people from discrimination in every area of their daily life, from housing to credit to employment and public accommodations. So that's huge. We're also the first state in the South to ban conversion therapy on minors. We also passed a law that will allow the Department of Education to create guidance so that local school districts know how to create more inclusive learning environments for transgender students. There's now a third gender marker option on Virginia driver's licenses. I mean, I could go on and on. So I just say that all to say I'm really filled with a lot of joy, a lot of gratitude. I think the one certainly that is at the top of the list and the one that we've really been advocating for many years is the Virginia Values Act. So as I mentioned, that law in particular will now protect lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people from discrimination. So if you are applying for a job or you are up for a promotion, you cannot be discriminated against in those situations because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. The same is true when you're applying for an apartment or trying to buy a house or in a place of public accommodation. So basically any place that's open to the public, clinics, shelters, restaurants, shops, all of these are considered to be public accommodations, and you cannot be turned away or denied service simply, again, because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. This is huge. It's a game changer for LGBTQ Virginians. We've been advocating for this for years, and are just so grateful that we were able to pass it this year. So definitely feeling lots of good spirit.
And I personally actually want to thank you guys for all the work you've done, because I'm bisexual. My partner is coming out as trans, and it's really just a relief to not have to worry about at least basic things, like us, not being able to find an apartment or being fired from a job. Like it's just one more thing that's like taken off the plate, which is really helpful. So I think you've touched on this a little, but my next question is, why is this law so important?
It's so important for a variety of reasons. Did you just put a little pun in there and say snow? Mm-hmm. Okay, just want to give you a shout out for that. Great use. So yeah, I would say for many reasons. Actually, the majority of LGBTQ Americans live in the South, are raising their families here in the South. And so for Virginia to have this law in place, it means that LGBTQ people can be their true, authentic selves here at home. Unfortunately, many people who are LGBTQ have made life decisions that have taken them out of Virginia. So have decided not to go to school in Virginia, or not to get a job in Virginia, or actually choose to move out of the state. And many families have actually moved out of the state because they do not feel like their child was protected. And so this is a game changer in many, many ways, not just for LGBTQ Virginians, but for the many systems in which LGBTQ Virginians live and move. So it impacts our businesses, it impacts our education systems, it impacts our healthcare in many, many positive ways. And so I think especially when we talk about the business community, we're going to be able to retain top talent. We're going to be able to recruit the best and the brightest minds for our businesses and in the workplace. And so I think that it's not just good for LGBTQ Virginians, but it's good for Virginia as a whole. And we know that it's not just good for the bottom line, but also, poll after poll and our research showed that the majority of LGBTQ Virginians were ready for these protections to be in place. And I'll share, many of them thought that the protections were actually already in place. People were shocked when we told them that you could be discriminated against, you could be fired, you could be denied housing simply because of your sexual orientation and gender identity here in Virginia. And so this is just it's a real game changer. People will be able to go about their day-to-day lives and feel a little bit safer here in the place that they call home.
So how long have you guys been trying to pass this law? Actually, I assume for a while.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've been around since 1989, but we've really been focusing on non-discrimination protections and really trying to pass comprehensive legislation for the past several years. And I will say that we've kind of been doing that in some chunks. So we focused on employment discrimination, we focused on housing discrimination, but this is the first year actually that we actually addressed public accommodations. And so there was some learning there that we needed to do and educate our community about what it meant to be discriminated against in public accommodations. Even that word, public accommodations, can be a little confusing. So we, for the first time, we're advocating for protection in all three of these areas: in employment, in housing, and in public spaces for the first time this year. But we've been advocating for non-discrimination protections for many, many years.
Yeah. So what was it about 2020? Because like you said, you've been doing this for a while. But what was it about 2020 that really made that happen?
I think there are a couple of reasons, actually. So first and foremost, I think being able to build relationships year after year with our lawmakers on both sides of the aisle definitely helped us to come to this moment. We were incredibly lucky to partner with Senator Adam Eben and Delegate Mark Sickles, who both championed this legislation, carried companion bills in the House and the Senate, and did a really incredible job of advocating for this legislation. Really just incredible partners, and did a lot of work to help push this legislation through. So we wouldn't be here without that leadership, certainly. And then I think too, another big strategy for us has been educating Virginians about the need for these protections. Again, as I mentioned, Allison, many people didn't realize that you could be legally discriminated against here in the Commonwealth. And so we had a lot of education to do. And we had a lot of education actually as well to help the broader community understand, in particular, the needs of the transgender community. So research that we often quote says that the majority of Americans, the majority of Virginians, if you ask them, will say, yes, I know someone who is lesbian, gay, or bisexual. In fact, about 90% of Americans will say that they know someone who's LGBT. On the flip side of that, only about 10 or 15% of people in the country can raise their hand and say that they know someone who is trans. And
Mm-hmm.
so we kind of see this disparity in understanding and this lack of familiarity that then kind of correlates to a lack of support for issues related to the trans community. So we knew that we needed to help the community gain familiarity and understanding with transgender people and transgender people here at home, and help people understand that trans Virginians, shop at your local grocery store, go to the same mechanic as you, run in the marathon beside you. I mean, are really woven into the fabric of our community here in Virginia. And so it felt really important to us to help educate the public about trans Virginians in particular. And so we've been doing that through a variety of ways. Just so grateful thinking about the dozens and dozens of transgender Virginians who were very visible in this fight, who shared their personal stories of discrimination or shared their personal stories of impact about what having this law in place would mean to them personally. Also, family members, friends, allies also shared their personal stories about why passing this legislation would be so important for the transgender people in their lives. So we had some incredible advocates who, again, visibly shared their stories. We held about half a dozen actually panels. We call them Ask a Trans Person panels. And we set those up in kind of the greater Richmond area and the Hampton Roads area so that, again, people could just have open conversations with transgender people in their local community, get to know trans people in their communities. It was just open dialogue, story sharing, again, just getting to know individuals. And we know that once again, we build some of that understanding and some of that familiarity, we see that support for trans people and trans related issues just exponentially increase. And so I think helping to create more visibility for trans Virginians, and then also providing a platform for transgender Virginians to be able to tell their own stories, to be able to share their own experiences and use their own voices in this fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really think that education about what it's like to live as a transgender person is so important.
Yeah.
Not just because it helps people in the community understand, but also because the more that people are aware and the easier it is for trans people to come out. And I think that that's just I can't state how important that is.
Yeah.
So let's see. So besides your organization, who else were the progressive champions of this law?
Sure. So in particular, so I'm going to give you two parts to that answer. In particular, we worked with the Virginia Values Coalition. So Equality of Virginia was a member of the Virginia Values Coalition. And then we had a steering committee that was comprised of some national organizations who were incredibly helpful in our advocacy here in Virginia. So that steering committee was comprised of great legal minds from the Human Rights Campaign, also great, just incredible advocates from Freedom for All Americans, again, great legal and communications experts there. And then also the National Center for Transgender Equality was also, those organizations were key members of the steering committee. We also work really closely with the ACLU of Virginia as well. And then we also had the broader Virginia Values Coalition, kind of outside of the steering committee, which was composed of dozens and dozens of organizations across the Commonwealth, from Planned Parenthood to Health Brigade to Diversity Richmond to the Virginia Anti-Violence Project. I mean, the list just goes on and on. We were very grateful to partner with so many incredible organizations, nonprofits, advocacy groups, who really worked hand in hand with us to move this legislation across the finish line. And that coalition was also comprised of faith leaders. So we had over 100 faith leaders, again, from across the Commonwealth, who supported this, who were LGBTQ affirming and really visibly and vocally supported the Virginia Values Act in and of itself. And then, of course, we had hundreds and hundreds of actual individual advocates, LGBTQ people, allies, who were also part of that coalition as well. So to say that this was a team effort is definitely an understatement.
Yeah. So how does this law dismantle white supremacy and other systems of oppression?
Sure. So the Virginia Values Act actually did more than just protect LGBTQ people from discrimination. Um, Virginia was actually previously one of only 5 states that had zero public accommodations protections at all for anyone, regardless of race, gender, veteran status, ability status, etc. So the Virginia Values Act actually codified protections for a variety of individuals across identities. And then, of course, we know that's so important because we don't, as Miss Audre Lorde was famous for saying, like, we don't live single issue lives. And so the fact that the Virginia Values Act has helped to move equality forward for all LGBTQ people, including LGBTQ people of color, including Black LGBTQ people, is so important. And I think also this advocacy has really helped to center and focus the fact that um, we have a lot more work to do to ensure that LGBTQ people of color um, do not continue to experience disproportionate discrimination. And we know that that unfortunately continues to happen, despite the protections that are in place at the federal level, at the state level, that of course, racism and sexism and transphobia and homophobia continue to occur. And so I think that the Virginia Values Act helps us to continue to have those conversations about how we are advocating for all LGBTQ people, and especially Black LGBTQ people who, again, continue to experience just disproportionate discrimination in many factors of their life. And so the Virginia Values Act helps to put protections in place so that LGBTQ people of color don't have to wonder if they're experiencing discrimination because of race or some other part of their identity, but that this piece of legislation, this law now actually is comprehensive.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so now that you've passed this law, so like what's next on your Christmas list? What's coming up next for you guys as an organization?
Sure. Um, we've got some exciting work to do ahead of us. I'll share that our board actually has been doing some strategic visioning work since April to have this very conversation. What's next for Equality Virginia? As I mentioned, we've been advocating for non-discrimination protections for years. We've been advocating to ban conversion therapy for years. We've a lot of the work that we've been doing for some time now has all kind of led us to this moment where we've been able to check off many important key pieces of legislation that impact LGBTQ people in their daily lives. And so that's exactly right. What's next for Equality Virginia? And of course, there's so much more work that needs to be done, especially again, as we continue to talk about the needs of especially Black LGBTQ people who, again, continue to experience disproportionate discrimination. I can give you an example, for example, in the rates of HIV infection here in Virginia and actually here in Richmond in and of itself. Rates of HIV infection are disproportionately higher in the Black community and among men who have sex with men and among Black women. And so we need to make sure that we modernize our HIV laws here in Virginia because they are incredibly out of date and they must be updated actually. So we'll be doing some work. We're actually working in coalition with ECHO Virginia, who has been advocating for HIV modernization for several years here in the Commonwealth. And we're glad to be partnering with them to move this legislation forward in 2021. Additionally, when we talk about youth and out-of-home care, LGBTQ youth of color are again disproportionately in those systems and are again disproportionately discriminated against in those systems when we talk about foster care and adoption. And so we need to make sure that, again, the laws of the Commonwealth are protecting and allowing space for all LGBTQ Virginians to thrive. So we've definitely got our work cut out for us, and we'll be having some conversations about this throughout the summer. We're going to be having a town hall and some subsequent conversations with community members across the Commonwealth. To discuss this, we'll be releasing a community assessment so that we can hear from LGBTQ Virginians and allies about what they want to see addressed in the 2021 session.
Great. Thank you so much. Sorry, I didn't warn you this is the last question, but thank you so much for joining us. And it was really great to talk to you about the Virginia Values Act and everything that you guys are doing at Equality Virginia. So I'm going to hand it over to Ashley so that we can transition to our next topic.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks Bea for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time. I'm Ashley Crocker. I am the communications director here at Progress Virginia. And Lori, if you want to turn your camera on and unmute yourself, I will introduce you. We are joined by the amazing and tireless advocate for gun violence prevention, Lori Haas from the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Lori, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence and the work that you guys have been doing.
The Coalition to Stop Gun Violence is a C4. Our C3 is the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, and we work in tandem. Our C3 obviously does a lot of educational work. We consider ourselves a think tank and a public health policy think tank. We take data and evidence and translate it into policy, and then the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, our C4, advocates for that policy and raises awareness and works on messaging and the political landscape, as our C4 allows. And it's a organization. The Coalition to Stop Gun Violence was founded in the early 70s, shortly after some of our heroes of the 60s were gunned down. Martin Luther King and John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and was founded early in the 70s to fight gun violence and handgun access in particular, and has grown over the years. We do work all across the country. My job is Virginia, and sort of, kind of run the de facto state organization here for gun violence prevention, and work with allies and supporters and grassroots and grass tops all across the Commonwealth. So personally, the gun violence issue is personal for me. My daughter was shot and injured at Virginia Tech in 2007. She's doing well. I'm honored and proud and, humbled that she is, and grateful that she is. There were 32 families whose loved ones were shot and killed that day. So it's been a journey for me personally to try to prevent gun violence in the Commonwealth, and it's something I'm devoted to.
Well, we're so grateful for all the work that you're doing. So tell us a little bit about what Virginia laws just went into effect July 1st that give you some Christmas spirit.
Well, Virginia mirrors the national numbers with regard to gun violence. 2/3 of our gun deaths in Virginia are homicides with a firearm. I said that backwards. 2/3 are suicides with a firearm. About 1/3 are homicides and other. We as an organization are devoting to reducing gun violence in all its forms, accidents, homicides, injuries, and suicides. And one of the bills that passed in the Virginia General Assembly session this go round was something called an extreme risk law. We know that there are many, many kinds of crisis that people may find themselves in. It's not just a mental health or mental illness diagnosis. Perhaps it's substance abuse, or perhaps, frankly, angry white men are a risk factor. Perhaps you're going through a grief process, or, a family issue. There are many reasons that people may find themselves in crisis, and temporarily separating that person from his or her firearm for a duration of a civil order, it's a civil order, has been, found to capture people at risk of harm to self or others. And again, for a temporary time in their life, separate them from their firearm. These risk orders have been passed in 19 states and the District of Columbia now in recent years. And we're just very proud of the fact that we are attacking this issue on multiple fronts.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds really important. How long have activists been trying to pass this law in Virginia?
Well, we introduced it in 2015, so it's been 5 years. The gun violence prevention movement really, has been around a long time. The Virginia Center for Public Safety, the legacy group, was founded in 1993 and worked with then Governor Wilder to pass the one handgun a month law that was in effect for many years, decades really, until Bob McDonald, then governor, led a charge to repeal that. So the movement is wide and vast across the Commonwealth. It did gain some momentum, I think, after the tragedy at Virginia Tech, because that was the largest mass shooting at that time, and sadly ushered in this, current period of mass shootings that we experience across the country. And then of course the shooting at Sandy Hook, raised the profile of the issue in ways that people perhaps understood it better, and were more sympathetic, honestly, to the fact that gun violence can occur anywhere and any time. We see too much gun violence in too many places, and frankly, disproportionately in communities of color through no fault of their own. It's just the systemic, race-based issues we've seen that lead to all sorts of inequities. And gun violence is also is one of those problems. And as we know, we've got a long journey to rectify some of those systemic issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, 2020 was a good year for folks trying to prevent gun violence in the Commonwealth. What about 2020 made passing the extreme risk protection law possible?
We have, I personally have worked on this for a long time, since 2007, and learned in the first several years of this journey, that telling my story in front of legislators, offering data, offering evidence, offering, proof that states with strong gun laws have fewer gun deaths. It's a fact that the CDC will share with you when they rank states, according to their gun deaths. But realize pretty early on that, no amount of families telling the stories, frankly, of their dead loved ones, been shot and killed, ripped from their families. No amount of evidence, no amount of, logic were working, that if they weren't going to vote with us, we were going to vote them out. And we worked hard on the politics of the issue, on the political landscape for many years. We're particularly proud that in 2013, we elected 3 statewide officials who were committed to gun violence, and not only committed, but ran loudly and proudly on the issue in 2013. And I think over time, we've chipped away at getting people out of office who didn't support this issue and getting people into office who did. 2019, of course, would change the political landscape in Virginia. And in the 2020 session, we literally passed over a dozen laws to keep the citizens of the Commonwealth, safe from gun violence. We're very proud of the fact that we got a sizable chunk of change in the budget to put money into community-led programs in cities, again, that face disproportionate amounts of gun violence. So, it's not one single fix. We do need policies, we do need laws, but we need community funding, and we've worked hard to get that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you said that there were a dozen other bills that passed this General Assembly session. Are there any other ones that you want to highlight?
It is, again, a combination of things, but we now have background checks on all gun sales. We know that persons through a history of convictions, these are not just imaginations, but persons convicted of certain crimes are prohibited from accessing firearms. And the best way to do that is to make sure they can't buy them. We added protections for domestic violence victims, for children. Again, the extreme risk orders. We want to be able to track firearms, and we're requiring people who lose or have them stolen report that to police. There are penny ante traffickers out there that will go and buy 10 and then go on the street corner and, sell them and, making money. And then when you trace them to a crime, they say, oops, lost it. Oops, stole it. And we know that there's some correlation. We can't quite figure out the data between unsolved cases and lost and stolen firearms and the trafficking of firearms, again, in too many communities. So there's a lot we've done in 2020. We have a lot, excuse me, more to go. But it's a breadth of legislation that passed that I think, regardless of your perspective, I hope it will give you some solace in knowing that we're working hard to reduce gun violence in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, who besides you and the people you work with at your organization, who have been the champions of gun violence prevention? Who have you worked with? Who should we give a shout out to for their hard work?
First off and foremost, I would like to thank those people and families who have been directly affected by gun violence. It takes a great deal of courage to come up and stand, in front of a General Assembly and in front of a hearing time and time again. Frankly, when those committee members just bow their head in silence, offer thoughts and prayers, gavel the bill dead, and go on about their business, can you imagine the disregard and frankly disrespect, in my opinion? I even had a legislator say to a woman who had virtually lost her entire family to a domestic violence situation, that's the price we pay for freedom. And I just can't imagine someone saying that to me. So first and foremost, victims and survivors of gun violence, it takes an immense amount of courage. Secondly, we have a coalition of groups across the Commonwealth, in Hampton Roads, in Charlottesville, Danville, Roanoke, Harrisonburg, Northern Virginia. And these are grassroots activists who put their time and energy and money into this on their volunteer hours. We have a great action network. It's called the Virginia Action Network in Hampton Roads. Community leaders from across Norfolk and Newport News and areas down there that give their 25th hour, to fighting for their communities and advocating for, policies and funding to prevent gun violence. And of course, we have some national groups that have joined the fight, both politically and on the ground. So, it's a breadth of people powered, movement and, hopefully organizational support. And between the two, we can have been able to, again, change the landscape in Virginia and change the seats at the General Assembly, and we'll continue our work.
Yeah, it's so great that there are so many people working on this issue. I think, it's a lot of hard work. And as you said, it's a little difficult when you go to the General Assembly and tell a heart-wrenching story and are essentially ignored by some of the legislators. That can be really demotivating. But I think if the work that you guys are doing can save even one life, it is worth it. And we really appreciate all of the hard work that you guys are doing.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how this law affects everyday Virginians.
So which one in particular, the extreme risk law?
Yes.
Yeah. So right now, previous to July 1, I'll make up a scenario. Uncle Johnny is in the backyard with a 12-pack of beer. He's despondent. He's been, not himself for weeks or months. You're worried, you're concerned, what can you do? And again, he's sitting in the backyard with a 12-pack of beer and a firearm on his lap saying, I'm no good, I just should end it. What can I, life is not, for me, and the world is against me, or whatever commentary that, he's making. And you call law enforcement. Uncle Johnny's not broken any laws. He's not prohibited from owning that firearm. Abusing alcohol is not cause for an ECO or a temporary detention order. It's not a mental illness. And yet his family members need help. They want to give that help to Uncle Johnny. Now they can call law enforcement and say, can we get an emergency risk order? And that emergency risk order will separate Johnny from his or her firearms. They'll have to surrender those firearms. That in and of itself often is more than enough attention and support for that person in that crisis, for him or her to say, thanks for the help. Let me work on this issue. You know, we've seen in other states, it's still a new enough law that we don't have years and years of data. But we have seen in other states, you know, that this is being used exactly in the manner that the policy people intended, very surgically and narrowly, you know, applied to certain situations where the criteria of risk is great. And it appears as if it's not being disproportionately aimed at any one population or another. You know, some states report stopping, frankly, young people determined to do mass shootings at their schools, and it's had a great effect on one of the risk categories for firearm suicide is white men, older white men, and a number of states are reporting those types of clients getting these risk orders. You know, it's another tool for families that keep their loved ones safe. You know, it is meant to be a soft knock. You know what I mean? It is meant to be mutually supportive. It is meant to happen with family members. It is meant to happen in a supportive manner. So we hope that it works that way in Virginia. It seems to have been working that way in other states. And again, it's another tool for families and law enforcement to keep their loved ones safe.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone knows someone who is experiencing a mental health crisis and they want to get an extreme risk protection order, do they just call their local police department? How does that work?
So the two types of persons that can petition for these extreme risk orders are either your local law enforcement or your Commonwealth's attorney. If you don't want to go to law enforcement, you can go to your Commonwealth's attorney and explain the situation and say, we need this temporary fix. These orders are, the permanent orders are, the temporary order, emergency order is 14 days. Then there has to be a hearing in front of a judge, and the permanent order is 6 months. So you can go directly to your Commonwealth's attorney and explain the situation and start the process that way if you're uncomfortable calling law enforcement. So again, it's meant to be a tool that is there to help. It's there for support. It's there to, you know, mitigate a circumstance. You know, we know that suicide is the most lethal form of suicide is a firearm. Mm-hmm. We also, and you know, it's sadly successful in some studies 80 to 90% of the time. When a person attempts a suicide with other means, the success rate is way low, like somewhere like 10 to 20, maybe 20, you know what I mean?
Right.
So the often the urge for suicide is just temporary and momentary. We also know that persons who attempt suicide and live do not go on to commit suicide. The recidivism rate is way, way, way low. So if you can separate a person from a lethal means in that moment of crisis, think how many lives that can be saved. So, you know, again, it's intended to be a tool to help and support, you know, through a time of crisis in their lives. Whether that crisis is based on a mental illness or not, you know, it could be, again, some of the situations that I described.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anywhere in the state that you see that these laws, the extreme risk protection order or the background checks will have a bigger impact? Is there one particular spot in Virginia where there's more violence?
It's really unusual. So we have data on our website. It's called the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. And if you go to our website, it has state specific tab at the top and a drop down for Virginia. And you can scroll through that and see the data. And we've got a state map that shows it, and our homicide problems are greatest in some of our rural communities, deep Southwest Virginia, far Western Virginia, deep Southside Virginia. So we're hopeful that law enforcement will utilize this tool. And, you know, our homicide problem is different. It's located in communities, again, disproportionately affected by gun violence, but other public health inequities, you know, and we need a range of solutions in those communities. It's not one single policy. Certainly, you know, background checks aren't going to do it. You know, frankly, in downtown Richmond, and we know that. That's why we fought so hard to get monies into these communities for community-led programs that can interrupt the cycle of violence and cycles of poverty and access to health care and access to education and so many other public health issues that too many people face, and frankly, too many people of color. So there's not one single, spot or location, that is going to benefit from these laws, but we hope many will.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you said that you had a big year this year here in 2020, but I know that, and you said that your work is not done. So what is next for you?
We have, again, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, just the, access to firearms is a problem, and it is a problem for too many people, and it is a problem in too many situations. We passed a law that allows localities to legislate where guns can be carried in public spaces, i.e. parks and buildings they use for council meetings and government functions. And those locality bills, I think, are going to be helpful. A number of cities have already passed some laws. Newport News, I believe, is one. Charlottesville's either done it or working on theirs. Maybe we need to find out. And then Alexandria, I know, has passed a bill. But, we have some concern about open carry and concealed carry in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and what risk that puts everybody at. You see road rage, and whether you get the traffic frustrations or not, when you have somebody, there was a shooting near Fredericksburg recently, and that was described as a road rage incident, and a man pulled out his firearm and shot 2 people dead. If he hadn't had that firearm, would those people be alive? I contend yes. He might have hit them with their car. He might have done this. He might have done other things. But again, firearms are deadly, often deadly. And we really just need to think about who has access to firearms, where they have access to firearms, how they use those firearms, and where they can carry those firearms. So we're doing our due diligence, looking at the data, looking at the evidence, and going to be, thinking more going forward, what that can look like. One of the governor's bills that did not pass in 2020 was the assault weapons ban. So we'll likely be revisiting that in some way, shape, or form. It was sent to the Crime Commission to be studied. So perhaps we'll see what the Crime Commission has to say about that very subject. But we also...
Correct me if I'm wrong, aren't you a newly minted member of the Crime Commission?
I might have been appointed to the Crime Commission, so thank you, Ashley, for that. So we have our work cut out for us. We generally do, and we need to look at all gun violence, and that includes police gun violence. These too many killings across the Commonwealth in too many circumstances, and in my view, virtually every gun death is preventable. Think about it. It's that access to that firearm. It's that firearm in your hands. And in that moment, whatever that is causing that moment, allows that moment to become deadly. So we just really need to give this some serious consideration. It's a public health epidemic like the pandemic is. So.
Have you had any thoughts about the upcoming special session? Will there be any bills that you'll be pushing at that time, or are you waiting until 2021 regular session?
During the special session, it is our organization's intention to support putting more guardrails on the type of interactions and actions that law enforcement can take. Violence is not the answer to any situation. It just isn't, no matter who is perpetuating that violence. We have, again, consider, gun violence in all its forms, and it's so we'll be supporting those who are leading on this police reform issue, criminal justice reform. We've always been about criminal justice reform. We don't consider ourselves the lead organization by any means, but we will be supportive of those who are working on this issue. And we have some research and some studies out there we're looking at. And informing us. We have a relationship with a woman who is on Obama's 21st Century Police Task Force, and she's been very helpful and informative. You know, it's about changing a culture.
Mhm.
You know, it really is about changing a culture. Violence is not the answer to virtually any situation. You know, I'm a hopeful person, and I, you know, understand, you know, not to the degree I need to, but, you know, emotion, you know, let's work on de-escalating situations. So again, we're not going to see any of what I consider the typical, you know, gun violence prevention bills during the session. I'm going to respect that this space and time is for this particular issue that needs a great deal of attention, and that is, you know, reform. Also the budget and COVID, but, you know, I think it's time for us to be supportive of those groups leading on that issue.
Yeah, there are so many things coming up that are so important and vital to our communities. We have our work cut out for us, but we appreciate you so much for joining us today. This was a really great conversation. And again, we're so appreciative of all the work that you do, Lori.
Well, a shout out to Progress Virginia, because you have been supported for many, many, many years. And, you know, back in the early days when there wasn't much happening, I appreciated all the support, in particular from Anna Scholl. She's always been a great partner, as has Progress Virginia. So thank you for all that you do to support the work of so many of us.
Thanks. All right. Well, we are unfortunately going to have to wrap up a bit earlier than we planned. Our guest to talk about the Confederate monuments coming down has had a technical difficulty. So we are going to try to come back to that at another time. We will certainly not forget about that important issue. But thank you all for joining us. We had a great time today. And thanks to our guests, V and Lori. And we will see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.